Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly and I'm a mixed media artist who specializes in gouache paint and ink, and sometimes I do digital art. If you've been to my channel before and you saw my most recent previous videos, you probably saw the raccoon painting, and this is the second one of the series. It's a possum. Possums are great, you know? Like look at that face. In this video, I'll be showing you how I start the underpainting. As usual, I'm using my watercolor pencils by the brand Derwent. And this isn't going to be a step-by-step tutorial, but it is going to be an educational process video where I explain everything I'm doing. This is the first video. There will be more to follow for this painting. Basically, I'm just going to go over how I start this painting. As I mentioned, I'm using my watercolor pencils, and anywhere there's going to be a shadow or anywhere there's going to be a generally darker area, I just place down blue right away. I like using cooler tone colors in the shadows. And anywhere where there's going to be a pink color to it, I'm placing a red watercolor pencil there. This is just an easy way to map out the tones and values of the painting for the layers to follow. It also mixes with the following layers of gouache, since gouache has a tendency to mix with whatever layers are underneath, and it creates a beautiful hue to all the layers of the paint. I am also adding a brown, I forget what the actual color name is called, but I'm adding a brown watercolor pencil and a beige one, because possum fur, while it is generally white and gray, in the lighting it can read a little bit on the beige side in the shadowy areas where it's lighter, if that makes sense. So that's why I'm placing brown down as a good sort of mid shadow for the white fur. This possum's gonna have a third eye that's glowing, just like my raccoon one, because I like a lot of eyeballs in my art. And it's going to be glowing, so the light is also going to be a lot more warm towards the face, where it's closest to the third eye. And wherever there's going to be a lot more direct light from that third eye, I am adding more of that brown as the mid-tone shadow for the white fur. Later on, I add a lot of white paint for details and texture, so it's not going to look brown, but you'll see in the next videos as I layer the gouache paint what it ends up doing. Once I have all of those colors placed with the watercolor pencils, I just go in with a small brush, but like larger than my super detailed brush, and I'm just mixing all that together and blending it out. You can just use really thinned out gouache paint or even just straight up watercolor for this step. I like using watercolor pencils. I just like the control that a watercolor pencil offers. I like being able to place it in a very specific area. If you put down like a single line of watercolor pencils and you put water over it, it still contains that shape of how you drew it for the most part. So that's why I personally like them, but you don't have to use them. After that, I'm adding white because the fur for the most part is going to be white. And I'm adding just basically a base coat of white down anywhere where there's going to be a general highlight, not like a blinding highlight, but just where the light is going to be hitting, like the arms, the stomach, the legs, the face, things like that. Okay, so after looking at a lot of pictures of possums on the internet, you guys should seriously see my Instagram Explore page now. It's covered in raccoons and possums after this project. I have noticed that they don't have rings around their eyes like raccoons do. They don't have really intense color patterns like that, but they do have a little bit of like some darker brownish gray fur around their eyes, and when they're a lot younger, their fur looks a lot whiter. I used a picture of a baby possum as most of the reference for the pose of this. I did have to look at other photos to pose the arms and make the mouth be opened, but the younger the possum is, I noticed they're a lot more white, and then as they get older, they have this heart-shaped gray furry pattern around their face that's really cute. So anywhere that fur pattern is going to be, later on I do end up using a brown watercolor pencil to put some of that fur color back in. Right now I'm just carving out the general contours of the possum. So where the light is going to be hitting the arms, I'm just layering that up, really blending that into the colors that I put in the underpainting, just creating an overall general sense of form. Quick side note, for the mushroom stems, I mostly used a beige watercolor pencils just for the local color of the stems. I did use some blue as a shadow that would be cast along the little mushroom ruffle skirt thing. In the last video, I kept calling it a ruffle skirt thingy. That's not what they're called. Here's the real term. I don't like calling it by the real term. It's weird. Alright, so since I have the basic form down, then I go in and actually start color blocking. The tongue, the nose, the mouth in general is going to be very pink. I'm adding a lot of red here. I'm blending out those watercolor pencils I placed, and I'm also adding some pink gouache to the little fingertips of their little hands. Look at those little hands. They're so cute, and their little toes. Their toes tend to be very pink on the pads and also at the last knuckle of their finger toe things, and then it turns into a gray gradient. It looks like they're wearing fingerless gloves, kind of. So for the tail, I made it pink, and they're actually not like bright pink like you would think a rat tail would be. They're actually really pale, but it does have a slight tinge of pink to it, so that's why I made that the undertone. They also have a very weird texture to them. I don't know how to describe it. It kind of looks like canvas, and where the tail is attached to their butt, they have a little bit of black scaly skin fur. I don't know. Possum anatomy. I'm trying to learn possum anatomy, but I'm not an expert. Alright, I'm just an artist and possum raccoon enthusiast. So I'm not in the detail stage by any means, but I am adding in some texture with white gouache paint. I'm just doing this to add a sense of texture and direction of where the fur is growing. With how the fur is growing, I'm able to see a little bit better where specific colors are growing in the fur pattern, if that makes sense. I end up adding a brown watercolor pencil back in, even though I kind of just covered all that up that I did put in to begin with, except I use it in a different way this time. I'm not using it just for the undertone, I'm using it as the fur itself, because there's some areas on the back of the arms where they have darker fur patterns, and also with how the light is going to hit it, there's going to be an area where the light meets the shadow, where there's going to be a higher saturation of color. I forget what this lighting is called, but I'll put in a diagram talking about what I'm referencing here. This also just gives a really good mid-tone shade to the white fur, and right now I'm just building this up so that I can later add more texture and details. As you can see, the fur looks like it's becoming more rounded. It's not like a flat, weirdly colored possum anymore. It's starting to look like, oh, that's an animal with fur. It's not a weird, smooth blob possum with blue and yellow. After that, I get a darker brown watercolor pencil. I think this one is called Copper Beach, something like that. And I'm using this to define groups of fur. So for instance, where the arms are folded in, like in the elbow, I'm going to define the fur right there. Around the legs, around the snout, and where it meets the eyes. This is basically just adding definition to the fur, and that is what you are looking at without going fully detailed, because it's too soon for details. We still have to build up these groups of color and structure before we get into that. Because if I were to just go in without defining groups of fur, if I were to just go in and paint every single little fur strand, first of all, that would take forever. That would take even longer than this process does. Second of all, it would get lost. It would look very flat even though there's detail. You need to have form and detail in order for it to really look like it's coming off the page. What I mean by flat is it would almost read like noise on a TV screen. There's a lot of detail, there's a lot of texture, but there's no form. Right now, I'm also defining the form with that same watercolor pencil, and I'm doing that with a damp brush. I'm not like drawing in hairs yet with the watercolor pencil. I'm basically just smudging the outlines I made and really making it flow with the contours of the growth of the fur. So it's looking really warm toned right now since I add that brown. But I actually really like that because the third eye is going to be glowing and it's going to be kind of a golden kind of hue to it. So I think it's going to be good. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this week's video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and I will let you know how this painting goes next week and do a full process video on that. I'll see you next week. Bye!